Hi everybody, long time no see. I'm Bianca and this is Femboy Reads, and today I'm coming at you live with my 2021 book favorites. I know it's a little bit late, but I had my tonsils removed and things are just starting to feel closer to normal, so I figured I could try and give it a go now. I think I also hesitated in my decision to film and post this, both because I haven't in so long filmed anything, also because it's been half a month already and most people were posting these, you know, end of December, first week of January, and also because I don't read a lot of new releases or 2021 releases, but it's clear through watching way too many booktube videos that have come out in the last couple of weeks that not everybody is reading 2021 releases, so I figured I would give it a go. I'm really bad at favorites questions. Like in real life, when anyone asks me a favorite question, I just blank as if I've never had any experiences in my life. And I'm also not great with ranking things. I think I can pick a favorite, like one favorite, or at least the one out of this bunch that I enjoyed the most, but I'm not gonna be necessarily putting them in any other order. I guess maybe I'll save that one that stands out for last. It's mostly fiction. I don't read a lot of nonfiction in general, and those that I do attempt, I don't often finish. My final book count, I think, was a little bit over 60 for the year, and a lot of those were in the second half of the year, so I certainly was not reading as much in the earlier half of 2021. We'll start with these ones. These are 3 out of 4 of the My Brilliant Friend series by Elena Ferrante. So the first, second, and third. I have not read the last one yet, though I do have it. I'm not really a series person. I think probably because they most often fall into the sci-fi fantasy genre, and I don't really go there with frequency. This series follows 2 best friends who are growing up in Italy from their childhood through their adulthood. You know, as much as it does follow them in chronological order, right, from their childhood through their adulthood, it does often play with time in some weird ways, so that we kind of know how things end up towards the beginning of the series without necessarily knowing how we get there. Lots of people really love Elena Ferrante. I was surprised at how much I did love these books and how attached I was to the characters. She's a beautiful writer, and this is in translation. You know, I can only imagine how it is in the original Italian. Something that I really loved about this, which is perhaps particular to me, is that it reminds me of how my dad and his siblings tell stories about their childhood. So she lives in like a small town outside of Naples, and it has at times almost like a mafia movie feel to it, because you know, there's like a web of people and everyone is connected to everyone. They're all grew up together. There's people who are dating one another, cousins, family members. Yeah, so it just kind of creates this like complicated web of relations. My dad and his siblings are all like first generation American kids who grew up in like an Italian household. So yeah, it's definitely funny to see the way that the stories kind of mimic the childhood that I know from my dad, which I think is why it perhaps feels sort of like close to home. I definitely really loved this. Essentially, it's about a young girl who is sort of like infatuated with her best friend, and the way that they sort of get each other like none other, and simultaneously love one another so much and also are competing in a kind of way. So yeah, a lot of people say it's like a brilliant portrayal of female friendship, and it is, and I would also argue that there is a tinge of queerness to it if you're looking. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I know that doesn't necessarily like tell you exactly what it's about, but it really just is about their lives, and if you think about the kinds of strange relationships and circumstances and problems that occur in movies like The Godfather or Casino or any of those, it kind of does have a similar feel to that. Another interesting thing about that series is that the author, Elena Ferrante, no one knows who she actually is. So that's a pseudonym or a pen name. A lot of people like equate the translator with the author, but that's not the case. Though she does stay loyal to her translator. She doesn't let anyone else translate her work. There's been a lot of like conspiracy theories around who the author might be, but nobody's been able to figure it out. And some academics, I suppose, did a they compiled and analyzed all these different modern or like contemporary writers and used some kind of like algorithm to try to match the writing style, and came up with like a close match to this man writer, but he denied that it's him. So the next one I have is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This was a recommendation, I believe, from Sage, if I'm not wrong. This is, people say it's a Dracula retelling. I think that's a bit of a stretch, though. It is about vampires. It doesn't follow the original Dracula story at all. Essentially, this is a story about a woman who is on the verge of death and is saved by this ancient vampire, and she then gets into a romantic relationship with him, only to find that it is essentially emotionally and sometimes physically abusive. Follows the story of their relationship and then of the intersecting relationships that come to be a part of their own and expand their own. So it essentially is a polyamorous love story, which eventually becomes a quadruplet of vampires. In the end, there are the main vampire and then the two women and a third and a boy. Well, not a boy, a young man. I was so floored by this book. I was not expecting to like it at all. It's so well written. The story, the plot is amazing. It had me gripped the entire time. I finished this super quickly. It's such a intimate and accurate portrayal of emotional abuse, and the way that it, I don't know, seeps into every aspect of your relationship. The way that toxic love can kind of overwhelm you and consume you. I thought it was beautifully done, though, you know, all the content warnings for that stuff. And it has a very satisfying ending, which I love. It's not often that I feel good about an ending, and this is one that I did like. It has a super gothic feel to it as well. There's a lot of historical elements, so yeah, I highly recommend this if you are into that kind of stuff. All right, so this is one of my 2021 releases. I'm sure you've heard lots about it. This is Sally Rooney's highly anticipated 2021 release, Beautiful World, Where Are You? This is my first Sally Rooney ever. I did watch the Normal People show on Hulu when it came out, but I've never read any of her other books. Sunny spoke so highly of this book that I finally decided to get it. If you know anything about Sally Rooney, the best way that I can think of to describe it is that she doesn't really write. A lot of her books are about nothing. The plot lines are simple and they're more about relationships and the way that people are connected. Essentially, this book is written in emails from two women who are college friends, living in, I guess, England or Ireland. I'm not sure. I think both, maybe. And they are longtime best friends. They're like, I think maybe in their late 20s, early 30s. I was skeptical about the email correspondence format. I didn't know if I was gonna like that. There are portions of it that are written in regular narrative, if I'm remembering correctly. Well, what I'll say is that on the surface level, I think that Sally Rooney writes for depressed millennials who like think they're smarter than everybody else, or specifically depressed millennial women. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. And I do think that's true. That tends to be the kind of person that enjoys this book, and that's not a bad thing. It addresses so much of what I think a lot of, you know, millennials and older Gen Z are dealing with right now with regards to the state of the world and how we fit in and what we're supposed to do when we are, you know, feeling hopeless to our core and still are supposed to find meaning and purpose and connection. It's a lot about friendship and love. So many of the things that they discuss with one another are things that I talk about with my friends. I think Sunny said something similar in their video. It's beautifully written. I find a lot of contemporary writing to be quite obvious and corny. And I don't get that from this at all. It's queer in the slightest of ways, but in a way that, you know, there's not a big fuss made about it, which I sometimes enjoy. And yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot more to say about it. That's probably already too much. I'm sure you've heard lots of things already. So this is my one and only nonfiction. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't finish it because I rarely ever finish nonfiction, but this is probably the farthest. This is all, what's it called, citations. So there's only about this much left. I probably could finish this in a couple of hours if I just sat down and did it. But the book itself is honestly a little bit repetitive, and I think that I got enough of a gist of what's going on here in order to be able to recommend it. This is Wayward Lives and Beautiful Experiments by Saidiya Hartman. This was actually a book that was recommended reading for a class that I took this semester on Black women's archives. I wasn't really connecting with any of the other required texts that we had read for class, and this book is explicitly queer. My final projects were approaching and I needed something. I got this one and I am happy that I did because it's just really good. It's unlike any other nonfiction that I've ever read. Saidiya Hartman is an academic and a scholar and an archivist, and she did a lot of work to sort of uncover information about who she identifies as wayward women from the early to mid 20th century. These women are Black, in many cases they are queer. What she defines as wayward is essentially outside of the bounds of respectability and sometimes outside the bounds of law as well. So, you know, a lot of these women are sex workers and who are having sex with men outside of marriage or having babies outside of marriage. She talks a lot about how we can look at the way that these women lived as experiments in being revolutionary, experiments in how to live when those in power don't want you to be able to survive. And she talks about beauty and luxury and the way that these women created art out of subsistence, out of just trying to exist. I think what I enjoyed so much about it, aside from the concept as a whole, is the way that she writes it, because there is so little archival information that exists about these wayward women. She kind of takes what little pieces that she is able to find and she fills in the blanks. In many ways, it does almost read as a fictionalized story. And yeah, it's not filled with, you know, references and dates and all the things in the way that nonfiction often is. And that's what deters me from nonfiction a lot of the time, is that in just a few pages, you're getting so much information that you can barely keep up. And I find that this has a narrative element in a way that drew me in. So yeah, if you're into nonfiction, or you're looking to give nonfiction a try, and maybe you're like me and don't often enjoy it, I think that this could be a really good place to start. I will say there's lots of content warnings for this as well, so please look into that. Okay, on a similar note, for that same class, I read Beloved. I have read it multiple times before, but never to the end. And this time around, I listened to the audiobook most of the way through and finished the end through the physical copy. If you've not read Toni Morrison, you should stop right now and do that. If you've never listened to the audiobooks, for many of them, she read them herself, or they're done in her own voice. So I really would recommend that. I'm not a huge audiobook person, but I found this audiobook of her speaking to be incredibly beautiful. I also just, anytime I read Toni Morrison, I'm like, why does anyone else even bother? This book is sort of genre defying in that it has some sort of mystical, fantastical elements to it. You can't quite tell if that's what's actually happening or if it's a metaphor or really what. It follows the story of a family, a woman and her daughter, who are living in a house that appears to be haunted by a child, a baby, and the way that that came to be. In some ways, it's a ghost story, although Toni Morrison herself had denied that it is a ghost story. It does read in that way, and, you know, people argue about that fact. It talks about slavery. It talks about the aftermath of that with regards to a family and the way that they relate to one another. If you read the blurb, it doesn't tell you a whole lot. It says, set in rural Ohio, several years after the Civil War. It's a chronicle of slavery and its aftermath. So it's beautifully written. It's deeply sad. It's very upsetting in a lot of ways, but I think it's worth it. So that is another one that I finally got to finish this year. Okay, so this is Margaret and the Mystery of the Missing Body by Megan Milks. I had never heard of this author. Lots of people were talking about it in some of the trans book spaces that I follow online. And so I decided to give it a shot. Some people were saying, talking about it, exploring some trans themes, exploring some eating disorder themes, coming of age, girlhood kind of theme. So I was definitely intrigued. It defied all expectations that I could have possibly had. This is another book that is genre defying. I don't even know how to categorize it. It's another one that has some sort of like strange fantastical elements that are really quite hard to pin down, that are just completely unexplained. There's some body horror stuff in here that is also just like, is that real? Is that not real? So pretty much this one follows a girl who is probably in her early teens is what I would say. She's probably like 13, 14, a high school girl who is sort of dealing with the fallout of a couple of friendships that she is confused by, or the ends of a couple of friendships that don't quite add up for her. Her and her friends ran this sort of mystery solving club and she has a kind of a fixation on it, and so she tells the story of their friendship and their falling out through these mysteries, and eventually the sort of evolution or the start and evolution of her eating disorder. There's not a whole lot more to say about the plot that won't give anything away, but yeah, there are queer themes in this. It is quietly trans, or the transness is a lot smaller than I thought it would be. But it's in there. This book is gross in a lot of ways. It reminds me of a much queerer and more contemporary version of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which is strange considering that the character's name is Margaret as well. It also is reminiscent of Girl Interrupted in a lot of ways as well. I think the author does say that they took some from there. Yeah, Babysitter's Club, Nancy Drew, Goosebumps, Girl Interrupted. It's really funny and weird. Like, it's just so weird. This book is so weird. There's body horror stuff in here if you're into that, which I've never really dabbled in, but I quite enjoyed it, and I've already ordered their new short story collection. So I really did like this a lot. I found it to be incredibly relatable if you know, grew up as a teenage girl. Next is A Dream of a Woman by Casey Plett. This is Casey Plett's second short story collection, and it is her third book publication, I believe. She also wrote Little Fish, which I read a couple of months ago. Little Fish I enjoyed, but it wasn't a top for me. Lots of people were talking about this one, and so I decided to give it a shot. This is also a 2021 release, and so is Margaret and the Mystery of the Missing Body. So A Dream of a Woman is a short story collection. Casey Plett is a trans woman, but she is part of that crew of white trans women who all hang out together, Tori Peters, etc. And she lives in Canada. So what I will say is that this book follows a number of different trans women in cities, I think mostly in Canada, potentially also in the US as well. Something that I really liked about this is that the characters that appear more than once, right? So each of the stories is separate from one another, but not entirely distinct. So sometimes there's a character that's introduced in one story, and like 2 or 3 stories later, they'll make another appearance. Either the first story will be continued or it picks up at a different point. I like the continuity of being able to come back to some of the characters. My favorite short story that's in here is probably closer to a novella than it is a story. It's quite long. That one really made me cry, and I liked it a lot. It explores themes of addiction, family, religion. Casey Plett, I think, grew up Mennonite, found family. There's a lot of stories in here about discovering transness. There's a lot of stuff in here about relationships and love and romance. There's a amazing T for T romance in here. I don't really love short stories, but I did like the way that there's sort of a continuity to this. It's so trans, but a lot of the themes that are explored are different from the more common ones that often appear in mainstream queer media. I don't know if that's doing it any justice, but finally, my top book of the year. This one stands out to me amongst the others. I think about this book so often. I recommend this book very frequently. That is A Little Blue Encyclopedia by Hazel Plante is how I would say it. I don't know if that's how you pronounce her last name, but she is also a trans woman. She hosts a podcast called T for T, which is about trans writers. So if you're into that kind of thing, you can find her there. This is, as far as I know, the only book that she's published. I'm gonna have trouble explaining it because it's just so weird, but it's amazing. So here's what I'll say. Okay, this book is about a woman, a trans woman who is in love with a friend of hers who has passed away. And she writes this encyclopedia, right? So it's from A to Z of a show that they watch together. It's a fictional TV show. And she writes this encyclopedia. So each letter of the encyclopedia is one piece of the show, right? So here, let me give you an example. Perhaps that will help. Letter B is for Mr. Bits, right? So that's a character on the TV show. Letter I is for Inky, one of the other characters. And so, you know, each letter corresponds to some different aspect of the show. And through those explanations, she both outlines the plot of the show as well as her relationship to this woman that she's in love with. She creates this entire fictionalized universe, both of this fake TV series, which kind of is reminiscent of Gilligan's Island, which I've never seen. The show is supposed to be sort of like a cult classic. And at the same time, she is, I think I'm getting tired of talking here. My voice is starting to sound worse. At the same time, she is also telling the story of her relationship to this woman. I don't want to give too much away. It's just beautiful. It talks about unrequited love T for tea, romance, friendship, and like what it is like to love somebody who doesn't love you back in the same way, grief and coping with grief. It's just so good. I feel like I hold this book close to my heart. It made me feel so many things, and the form is so strange to me. It's literally written like an encyclopedia. That shit is weird. And also, like, it is about transness, but being trans and coming out is not the plot line. Like, it's just like a side element of the story. Anyway, I know it's been so long since I've uploaded, so I thank you for tuning in. And please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments below what your favorite 2021 reads are. And if you have any recommendations for me based on the ones that I've showed you here, please do leave those for me below. Okay, thanks. Bye.